I'm happy to be here today with you guys, and it's been a fun project for the last year or so to be involved with this program. Also a lot of statistics, but also a lot of fun too. I know there are people in the world who find statistics funny and they enjoy that, but I'm not one of those individuals. So my talk has very little to do with statistics, but it took me a long time to figure out what I want to do in conjunction with this project, and I ended up with this rather specific topic about free will beliefs and personality growth. And I thought it might be interesting to look at the different possible relationships between these topics, and I'm going to give some preliminary ideas about that. And basically I'm going to tell you a story, and the story is not a happy one. It's quite sad and it's quite confused. I wish I knew 12 months ago what I know now about the research. So we could have done the whole thing quite differently. But because people already know quite a lot about personality growth, so I'm going to focus more on the free will belief issue. So I'm going to say a few words about what I mean, or what people mean when they talk about free will beliefs, how they're measured, and how they might be related to other constructs, and the research that has been done earlier on this topic, and how we used the earlier research to build up towards the hypothesis that we wanted to test, and how those hypotheses may not be very good ones. And that's the sad part of the story. So, what are free will beliefs? It's quite central to realize that when we are talking about these free will beliefs, we are not talking about the phenomenon of free will. We are talking about what people believe or think about these things. So I'm not saying anything about whether people have free will or how it's constituted or anything like that. We're trying to study what people believe about free will. This is one way of putting it. Lay people's free will beliefs are metacognitive judgments about the extent to which individuals intentionally guide their thoughts and actions. Specifically, belief in free will reflects the belief that people are responsible for their actions because they can decide and control their own behavior. So you can already see a couple of things from this. One is the content of some of these free will beliefs. Intentional guidance of action, thoughts and actions and attitudes, and also links to other beliefs, like beliefs about moral responsibility and control. And these are quite crucial. So when we're talking about free will beliefs, we're not just talking about a couple of specific beliefs, we're talking about a larger batch or a set of beliefs that includes all sorts of things, which are being measured by different sorts of scales and measurements. And one of the problems in the research has been that we've had a number of different kinds of measurements and scales for free will beliefs. And I'm just mentioning two more popular ones that have been used recently. For instance, the so-called FAD scale, or Freedom and Determinism scale, or FAD plus scale, which has been quite popular. But now the most comprehensive one and the recommended one, I think, is the 2014 Free Will Inventory by Nadelhofer and others, which measures a number of different things. The strength of people's free will beliefs, the content of those beliefs, and how those beliefs are related to other beliefs about determinism, dualism, and responsibility. And here are a couple of example items from the free will inventory. As you can see, there are a number of different categories. One is free will beliefs. These include inventories like people always have the ability to do otherwise, how people's lives unfold is completely up to them, that measures it looks at the strength of beliefs. And then there's this connection to determinism and dualism. They have items like people's choices and actions must happen precisely the way they do because of the laws of nature and the way things were in the distant past. And there's the connection to dualism. Human action can only be understood in terms of our souls and minds and not just in terms of our brains. And then there's the content of the free will concept. And they have items like free will is the ability to make different choices even if everything leading up to one's choice were exactly the same. Or free will is the ability to make a choice based on one's beliefs and desires, and so on. And then, of course, the relationship to moral responsibility and basic desert. Like people deserve to be blamed and punished for bad actions only if they acted of their own free will. So, when going forward, when I'm talking about free will beliefs, I'm talking about this batch of notions. So certain contents and certain set of beliefs that includes beliefs about determinism, dualism, and a number of other things, as you can see from here. And the effects and how free will beliefs behave have been studied for some time already. Most famously, 2008 introduced one of the first big studies that made a splash on how manipulating free will beliefs of individuals led to certain kinds of behavioral outcomes, including increased cheating. So they were playing games, certain kinds of games where it was possible to cheat. And those individuals who were in the manipulated condition, who were manipulated by anti-free will material, and this is the classical way of organizing these things. So you make people read a specific bit of text that criticizes free will, and then you measure how people behave afterwards. And it turned out, based on this particular 2008 study, that people whose free will beliefs were manipulated towards a more kind of weaker direction, they would cheat more. And after that, a lot of studies started to come in. And this is a kind of summary of the findings so far. So there are a number of factors that they've noticed that influence people's free will belief. Including cognitive factors like decreasing or manipulating people's free will beliefs affects brain processing related to error monitoring and the sense of self-control. There are physiological effects. You see this effect apparently that decreasing free will beliefs or making them less strong affects the ability to initiate action. And there are all sorts of social effects, as I just mentioned, like increased cheating, reduction of helping behavior, learning from emotional experiences, and also people have less feelings of gratitude and various other things. But there are also a number of factors that are influenced by free will beliefs, and how these are measured. I won't mention them too many of them here, and a number of correlations, like if we find this increased link, we will find this link between strong free will beliefs and belief in paranormal events, and also how people associate free actions with positive goal attainment, and also in the social sphere. So the stronger your free will beliefs, they tend to correlate with better job performance, stronger retributive attributes, retributive attitude. So the stronger your free will beliefs are, the more likely you are to endorse, let's say, very strict retributive policies in terms of punishment, for instance, higher self-esteem, life satisfaction, and sense of meaningfulness. So this is the research. This is kind of summarizing the research that has been done so far. So it all looks pretty good and interesting at this point. So the sad part hasn't begun yet. So what one might then conclude from this body of research is that free will beliefs are crucial motivators for action, and they, especially moral action and attitudes. And another thing that you might conclude from this is that strong free will belief predicts something like higher self-efficacy, internal locus of control, and stronger resilience. I'll explain locus of control in a minute. And similarly, weak free will beliefs predicts lower self-efficiency, external locus of control, and weaker resilience. And the crucial assumptions, notice these assumptions that are made here. The first assumption is that social and cognitive factors can influence people's free will beliefs. So what happens to people and their context can influence their free will beliefs. And the second assumption, and this is the cruncher, behavior and attitudes can be influenced by free will beliefs. So a few words about other psychological constructs that are close to free will beliefs. There's a long-standing tradition in personality psychology and social psychology to study what is called locus of control, a kind of personality trait and an attributional style. It goes back to the 50s, the social learning theory, which then becomes part of personality psychology. And the idea is that people can have different kinds of locuses of control. If they have an internal locus, they have beliefs and attitudes like, I control my life, my intentions and goals determine my life outcomes. If they go more to the external end, they feel that they do not control their lives, luck and other contingent factors determine their lives outcomes. But it seems that there's a lot of variation here. So in the latest research, they've noticed that it's not a fixed thing that people have locus of control in one end or the other end. It might depend on the context, and also it might change from situation to situation, and people might in some context have internal locus and external locus somewhere else. So it's quite mixed. But the reason why this locus of control construct is interesting is that people have studied quite a lot about the effects of locus of control. So they found that internal locus of control correlates with higher self-control, lower anxiety, depression, moral development, higher moral development, growth, motivation, things like that. So internal locus of control seems to be having a lot of good benefits. And there are also beliefs about the construct of self-efficacy. So belief in one's capacity to execute behaviors that are necessary to achieve some goals that one has. So these are the kinds of concepts and constructs that psychologists have studied for a long time. But no one has really gone through the trouble of looking at how these connect to free will beliefs. And this is, I think, one of the first lessons that comes out of what we've tried to do in our research, and what I've tried to figure out is that we don't really know what these relationships are. And in order for us to study the relationship between free will beliefs and personality growth, we should definitely look at how locus of control and self-efficacy are related to free will beliefs. So we have this overall package of ideas, but we don't know how they relate to one another. And the people who are working on free will beliefs have completely different motivations than usually psychologists working on these other areas of personality psychology and all that. So these things haven't been linked. So I think it would be a great project to try to take these constructs and try to see how they relate to one another. So we've already, about post-traumatic growth and all the issues connected to that, all the various measures. So I won't say anything about that. But on the basis of the research that has been done on free will beliefs, I came up with a couple of hypotheses. So these were the initial assumptions or the initial hypothesis that we started with. First, strong free will belief will predict higher post-traumatic growth. So the assumption was that the more you're convinced that you're an agent and you have possibilities in, you have agency in the situation, you'll do better in bouncing back from trauma. That was the idea. And the second assumption, or the second hypothesis, that if an individual will construe the trauma as a challenge rather than a threat, he will report higher free will beliefs. And the third hypothesis was that experiencing positive post-traumatic growth will predict stronger free will beliefs. So if it turns out that you've grown from an adverse event, you've survived it, it would result in having stronger belief in free will because it boosts up your agency. So these were the hypotheses. And now begins the sad part. So one of the things that was unclear to us from the beginning was that we kind of ran free will beliefs and locus of control notions together without really being able to differentiate them in a strict way. But the problem is that there are a number of differences between these constructs. So free will beliefs are kind of attitudinal beliefs, things like that, whereas locus of control seems to track something a little bit different, like personality feature or attributional style or something like that. So they seem to be at different levels. And we made a kind of an assumption, an implicit assumption, that if you have strong internal locus of control, that will correlate with stronger free will beliefs, and the other way around, which I think would make sense. So if you feel that you're in control of your life, then that goes together with stronger free will beliefs, and the other way around. If you have the feeling that you're not in control of your life and you don't act like that, then you have weaker free will beliefs. But unfortunately, this assumption is not supported by the few studies that have been made on this, that have been done on this issue. So in an old study from 1983 by Waldman and others, they found no correlation between free will beliefs and locus of control. So there was really none. And the only other study that I was able to find that looks at the relationship between these constructs is by Rakos and a number of others from 2008, where they look at young people who've committed crimes, and for some reason, I don't know why, no one knows. In that sample, free will beliefs were negatively correlated with internal locus of control. I think quite surprising, and no one really knows why. So we don't have much on this. And this is the reason why I think that, so lesson number one, always try to be very exact with the constructs that you're using, and try to make sure that you understand how the constructs are measured and how they're related. So you won't run things together. And another part of the sad story is the fact that in some recent meta-analysis and studies that have evaluated the evidence so far, the evidence that I presented to you earlier about the effects of free will beliefs and also the factors that influence free will beliefs, the picture is not pretty. So in one analysis from 2018 that looked at the methodologies used so far in this research that uses these free will belief manipulations, they didn't find very good evidence for the effects. So they found that many of the samples were quite biased. There were a lot of women, a lot of students, minorities were underrepresented. And different studies used different scales and measurements which weren't necessarily transferable, or so it created a situation where free will beliefs were measured in many different ways, and the measures and scales weren't too reliable. So they are quite skeptical about especially the second assumption that we made. The second assumption being that free will beliefs have these downstream effects on people's attitudes and behaviors. So all the stuff, or not all the stuff, but many of the things that I said in the beginning, many of the findings, the evidence is actually pretty slim. And the cruncher is the meta-analysis that was just published last year by Gensho and a number of others. So they looked at almost all of the studies done so far. And they found that they offer some evidence for the first assumption, which is that when you introduce anti-free will belief manipulations, they do decrease free will beliefs and make belief in determinism stronger. So people's beliefs are being shaped by what happens to them and all that. So that's good. But even here, the effects were very short term. So if you would have people read a bit of a text or repeat that text out loud or listen to a lecture on how there's no free will, the effect on the beliefs of the individuals wouldn't last that long. So if you would measure their beliefs right away, they would report lower free will beliefs that they would previously report. But if you would wait for a couple of hours, then their beliefs began kind of coming back to the baseline again. So the effects seem to be quite short-lived. But the problem for our approach was the second issue, which is that the second assumption that free will beliefs have these downstream effects on attitudes and behaviors. They found that the existing studies offer very little evidence for that, affecting cognition, behavior, and attitudes. And also, many of these classic studies in the field, like the 2008 study on cheating and free will beliefs, people have tried to replicate that, and it hasn't replicated. It's been tried a number of times in different settings, no replication. So it might very well be that free will beliefs do have this downstream effect, but as of now, we don't have much evidence for it. That's what it seems like. So, as I said, moving forward, we basically assume that free will beliefs have downstream effects and on beliefs, behaviors and attitudes. That seems a bit unlikely now. We'll see how that goes. And another lesson that we should carefully delineate these different constructs: free will beliefs, locus of control, self-efficacy. And actually, we have very little evidence as to how these constructs are related and how they should be related. So this is something that we should study more, I think. I had some ideas of how we might move forward with this, but we can perhaps leave that for now if there's not enough time. So it's up to you. I can say a few words about that because it connects with what was said by Ryan and others about the problems of this post-traumatic growth research, and an article that came out last year on this and so a paper that came out last summer by Brady and Jayavikrama. I don't know how to pronounce his name, but he's the person who's been mentioned a number of times here. They point out these problems in post-traumatic growth research, which we've already talked about a little bit. One of the problems involve how to measure positive growth and positive change without personality transformation, and these various kinds of other problems with the research, self-reporting and all that, which are problems. And what is interesting in this paper is that they suggest an alternative. They suggest that they suggest conceptualizing post-traumatic growth as growth in virtue. And if that conceptualization is done, then perhaps some of these problems with the research can be addressed by focusing more on the issue of virtue and modeling post-traumatic growth in terms of growth in virtue. So there's a lot to say about that. But the reason why I think this is a good idea from the free will belief point of view is that it's much easier to link free will beliefs with the cultivation of virtue construct or the idea than with the somewhat hazy post-traumatic growth literature. Because there's a long-standing philosophical tradition and reflection on the relationship between free will and virtues, and there are models of free will in contemporary literature and in ancient literature even that explicitly build links between free will and free will beliefs and virtues. So one would then assume that because virtues are not things that accidentally emerge in human beings, they require something like personal agency. And it seems that they require a belief that one's actions and attitudes now can make a difference with respect to one's future actions and attitudes. So some kind of free will belief, and not just the free will belief, but the idea that by your own actions you can shape your character and shape your agency in the future, seems to be a constitutive idea for virtue cultivation. And also, personal agency requires belief in the efficacy of one's actions and some sort of control over one's behavior. So these free will beliefs in this sense seem to be baked in to the notion of cultivating virtue. And it would be quite interesting, I think, to study this in the future. So looking at how people's free will beliefs feed into the way that they conceptualize virtues and how they cultivate them. And whether if you don't have free will beliefs, related beliefs, then whether that shows in the way that you cultivate virtues. So this is just an idea for the future. So I think it would be a good way to go, I mean, if one wanted to make progress. Okay, that's it.
Just a remark concerning the locus of control. Already Rotter spoke about fatalistic locus of control. So very often, now in research today, we have internal and external, especially powerful others, who as doctors are powerful, and then fatalistic. And it's interesting, Kierkegaard says that fatalism is the prey of atheists. Mm-hmm. So more people talk about fatality, less they believe. So it might be interesting to see whether reference to fatalism changes what you say about free will.
Yeah. This is quite interesting because in the philosophical discussion, of course, there's a lot of work on the relationship between fatalism and determinism. And it seems that based on some of the evidence of the research that has been done so far, is that people tend to interpret determinism as fatalism. So people tend to conceptualize it as if determinism is true, it would mean that whatever they do has no influence, that they can't influence the future. But that's not what determinism means. But that seems to be what people, how people understand it sometimes. That's a bit controversial too, but these two things are connected, and I think this would be an interesting thing to study, the relationship between fatalism and determinism beliefs. So, yeah.
You worked a lot with the construct of, or with a discourse about having free will beliefs, or having strong free will beliefs. I was wondering what that, and you referenced it by a sort of list from different areas that influences having, or that is a marker of having strong free will beliefs. I was wondering what the relationships is with theories about free will. So, does having strong free will beliefs entail libertarianism? I suppose it excludes hard determinism. But But I was wondering, a sort of Frankfurt or in Germany, Peary style compatibilism might very happily underwrite free will beliefs in your sense. So what you're measuring with like having strong free will beliefs cuts across the libertarianism determinism debate in some sense. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, so the free will inventory measurement, what it does is that I didn't put in the items that have to do with the relationship between free will and determinism. So I didn't include them here, but they are part of the inventory. And if you're a kind of, let's say, intuitive compatibilist, then you might score very high on the free will scale and also believe in determinism. But this is one of the problems of the earlier free will measurements, because they conceptualized free will in contradiction with determinism. Yeah. So they would have a scale where they said, well, you have a kind of 1 to 5 free will at this end, determinism this end. So you have to put yourself there. But one of the benefits of the free will inventory is that these things are separated. So you can score high on free will and you can say, well, I've got these free will beliefs, but at the same time you can say, well, yeah, I believe in determinism. And many people go that way. And it seems, based on some of the work that has been done in the last 10, 15 years, is that actually people's, if we're talking philosophy now, it seems that people's intuitive free will concept is quite compatibilist rather than libertarian. And
many people would be about libertarians.
Yes, that's right. So the assumption before the research began was that of course people are intuitive libertarians. And that's partly true. So what the research shows that if people are asked directly about the relationship, then they usually deny the compatibility. Then they say, well, of course, if determinism is true, then can be no free will. But if you present different scenarios to them, like here is a guy who steals an old woman's wallet, and then you say, well, this happens in a deterministic world, then they say, well, of course the person is responsible because the person is doing it intentionally, he is expressing bad ill will, things like that, which are all compatibilist conditions. So this is something that well, there's a lot of debate about this now, so we don't actually know, but it seems that there are a lot of these compatibilist bits, at least in people's sense of the kind of intuitive concept of free will, and whether there even is one. So, but in any case, yeah.
Yeah, as a follow-up, so I had questions in this kind of area too. So I guess, is it the case with the free will inventory? You don't get like a single overall score for your free will beliefs. You get several different answers.
Yeah.
Several different content. And then some meta-analysis, if it's saying that, well, no, we don't find support for the influence of these free will beliefs on outcomes, then what that's saying is that none of these scales influence. Is that right? Downstream outcomes of the. Okay, those are just like for clarification and understanding. So I'll ask one more question that's kind of in the same domain, which is it's really suggestive about what you were saying in response, and I was just wondering about this the whole time. Like, it makes it sound like people's free will beliefs, to the extent that they have them, they're like highly unstable. Like people maybe they just haven't really thought about this stuff, and then you gave them these questions. Answer it one way, but then like if you worded it differently, they answer it a different way. And then if they sound really highly unstable like that, it makes you think maybe they're not going to have much of a downstream influence. They might change a whole lot between now and, I mean, maybe they'll have some impact like right now, that right in this context, now they've been manipulated somehow, but hard to expect maybe that they have some consequence like 3 months later.
Yeah, so for the most part, I think I agree with you that it seems to me as well that a lot of these, let's say, abstract free will beliefs are quite unstable. So that's what it seems to me. But then at the same time, there is some stability about this issue about control and moral responsibility, these connections, and also the connection between determinism and free will beliefs. These seem to be stable, at least to some extent, because some of these studies have been done in different cultures. So one of the findings that replicates quite well across different cultures is that determinism and free will don't seem to be very compatible with one another. So this is something that comes up with studies in Asia and in Europe and in the US and things like that. And the same thing with when they run these studies about moral responsibility in deterministic worlds. So they tell people stories about individuals who work in deterministic conditions, and they find out that even people who think that determinism and free will are incompatible, they tend to evaluate moral responsibility in these situations in similar ways. So I guess my own takeaway from this, or my own kind of preliminary conclusion would be something like this, that yes, the philosophical or more abstract free will belief is pretty unstable because it's so abstract. And so it probably doesn't have much effect. But the kinds of things that it's closely related to, like moral responsibility, those kinds of things actually matter for us humans. And I think we have a lot of cognitive machinery to deal with those things. And we would expect, because of that, those intuitions and the ways that people reason about responsibility scenarios to exhibit at least certain kinds of patterns, so not just change randomly. So in that sense, I think there is more stability. But if you just look at the, free will is this or that, and then people, rate that, then there's a lot of variation.
I see a couple of difficulties with the questionnaire. So one you addressed, it's quite abstract. So thinking about free will itself, many people actually do not spend time on doing this. So asking a question like this might involve that people start thinking about it for half an hour before they make a cross, or they just make a cross because they do not want to think about it, so which affects the validity of the question. So I had a quick look at the questions. Typically, so the stance in psychological diagnostics is that make the questions easy as possible. That people can understand it very easily and mark it. This is not the case here. They are quite complex and they afford some sort of previous knowledge and reflectiveness that you have had before. So this said, the questionnaire looks like a questionnaire for kind of experts to some degree, not for lay people, and which may also explain why adolescents do not show a correlation between free will beliefs and what was it, a locus of control and things like that. So in psychological diagnostics, you actually develop specific questionnaires for other populations, such as adolescents, children, adults, elderly people, and this is not what they have done. So they just use it and give it to adolescents, and when they do not find anything, for sure they will not. The second thing is that free will beliefs, and you said it's very abstract. It's kind of a philosophical debate out of which you create an attitude which we might attribute to, we mentioned it, logos, as we might say, the ego. Locus of control is much more a feeling that you have if you can control something or not, which is often, not always, independent of how you generally think about the world on a philosophical level. You can also think about God on a philosophical level and say, well, I actually cannot agree that there's a logic that can prove God, and still I feel it. This might also be a reason why the correlation between the two is not very high. And the third thing that I wanted to say is that the questions in the questionnaire are still a little bit heterogeneous. So as it is too abstract for lay people, it is not differentiated enough for experts. So, for example, when the one subscale about dualism asks, do you believe in a distinction between mind and body? Yes, I do. And then they talk about the soul and the body, and then, oh, well, soul and mind, I have different conceptualizations. It's not the same. No, I don't believe in the soul, but I think that a difference is there between mind and body. So you may give it to experts, they do not find it differentiated enough, and the results that you get with the scores, and if you give it to lay people, they may not understand the questions.
For
So,
time reasons, a short answer, because we have to give.
Yes.
Yeah.
So my short answer is yes, I agree. And to explain, one of the problems with these measurements is that because they're coming from experimental philosophy, so they are designed to answer philosophical questions. So that's the whole point of these free will belief measurements. The people who make those, they want to know they want to have pretty specific answers to philosophical questions, like how people conceptualize free will and things like that. But if it's really the case that it's just quite abstract and people don't really think about that, and there is really no everyday notion of free will, I'm inclined toward that direction myself, then it means that it's not really measuring anything very concrete. Whereas the more established ways of looking at things like the locus of control measure, they're measuring something that is, let's say, much easier to measure and also more practical. So, yeah, that's how it goes. Thanks.